To understand how the UK arrived at the eye of this perfect storm, we need to go back more than 20 years and to understand the way that events can create totally unforeseen consequences. On the 25th of April 1986, at a power station near the town of Pripyat in the Ukraine, a team of engineers was preparing to carry out an experiment to test a safety feature on one of the plant's 4 nuclear reactors. Today, the name of the plant is known across the world, Chernobyl. In the early hours of the morning, Reactor 4, capable of producing a gigawatt of electricity, suffered a catastrophic power excursion. This caused a steam explosion which tore the top off the reactor, exposed the core, and dispersed large amounts of radioactive material onto the wind and across the globe. It was only after the radiation levels set off alarms at nuclear power plants in Sweden that the world knew of the problem. The meltdown produced a nuclear cloud that floated over much of Eastern, Central and Southern Europe, from the Ukraine to Ireland and down to the Med. And yet, the truth is, we all got off very lightly, despite the horrors that were to follow. Further devastating steam explosions were averted because rescue workers gave their lives to the cause. The injection of 25 tonnes of liquid nitrogen froze the earth at minus 100 degrees C and prevented radioactive material reaching the water table for long enough for teams of miners to pump out 20,000 tonnes of highly radioactive water. In the end, about 800,000 people, known as liquidators, worked on the containment and clean-up at Chernobyl. As far as we know, 100,000 of those people are now dead, and many more are seriously disabled. The vehicles and helicopters used by liquidators remain in the field in the Chernobyl area to this day, giving off high levels of radioactivity more than 20 years after the disaster. The 50,000 inhabitants of Pripyat were hurriedly evacuated and were told they could return within 3 days. They never did. Today, Pripyat is a ghost town. It sits within what is ominously known as the Zone of Alienation. Its buildings have been pillaged, and nature is looking to reclaim the crumbling concrete heart of the town and its drab blocks of flats. Chernobyl remains the most serious nuclear accident in history. Meanwhile, over in the UK, newly privatised electricity companies were carrying out a massive shift towards generation using natural gas. North Sea gas was freely available. Because of high interest rates, it was cheaper to construct gas turbine power stations than larger coal-fired power stations. Given what had just happened in the Ukraine, nuclear power was not a popular choice. The dash for gas had begun. And, in the thinking of the day, this wasn't a choice for government. In those days, it was assumed that just about everything was best left to the free market. Anyway, there was no apparent need to worry. In 1992, Michael Heseltine told Parliament that North Sea gas reserves would last another 50 years. Less than 20 years later, Britain has become a net importer of gas, the last stop at the end of a very long pipeline from Russia. We get what's left when all the other countries have taken what they want, and in very cold weather, that is sometimes not enough. Today, 43% of our electricity comes from burning gas. 25 years ago, that figure was about 1%. Meanwhile, our old nuclear power stations have operated since the mid-50s are being decommissioned because of their age. These should have been replaced from the mid-90s onwards by a newer generation of larger pressurised water reactors. But the spectre of Chernobyl still loomed, and there was thought to be plenty of gas. By this time, the miners' strike and the subsequent mine closures had seen the demise of much of the UK coal industry, placing us even more reliant on gas. The UK no longer has the homegrown expertise to build its own nuclear power stations. Instead, new power stations will be built by French industry. Imported coal is comparatively abundant and cheap, but it's highly unpopular from an environmental point of view. There will be no quickly available coal-powered power stations in the UK. The planning row over 2 new coal-powered replacement units for E.ON's Kingsnorth power station in Kent began in 2005. The government has announced that no new coal-fired power stations will be built in Britain from now on unless they capture and bury at least 25% of the greenhouse gases immediately and 100% by 2025. The government will direct the building of 4 energy clusters, generating a total of 2.5 gigawatts of electricity on the east coast of Britain. Each cluster will have at least 1 major new coal-fired power station and be able to collect carbon emissions and transport them out to sea, where they'll be buried in redundant oil or gas fields. The new power stations, the first to be built in over 30 years, are not expected to come on stream until 2015. Clearly we need gas, coal and nuclear, and we need other alternative sources of energy. We also need efficiencies in all that we do. But what we need more than anything else is a cohesive, joined up, long-term energy strategy to think our way out of a situation that has its roots in a power station in the Ukraine more than 20 years ago. It is clear that our current situation is a result of outside influences, inaccurate data about reserves, and the lack of a clear strategy in the past. We face 6 key areas of concern. Most of the issues are those we've already mentioned: falling UK energy reserves, security of supply globally, rising prices, the need to invest in new power generation infrastructure and to cut CO2 emissions in line with the EU 2020 directive. There's one other, the need to increase UK housing stock by 50% in the next 40 years. In the face of these, the government has 4 clear goals: cutting CO2 emissions significantly in the next 10 years and substantially by 2050, maintaining secure energy supplies in the UK, making sure that economic growth doesn't stall, and finally ensuring that every home in the UK is affordably and adequately heated. The directive lays down 2 legally binding conditions: a reduction of at least 20% in greenhouse gases by 2020, rising to 30% with subsequent international agreement, a 20% share of renewable energies in EU energy consumption by 2020. Some countries, like Sweden, already achieve far more impressive results. Others, like Malta, Luxembourg, and the UK, don't. Each country has its own individual target. Let's see what we have to do. By 2020, the UK must achieve 15% of its overall national energy requirement from renewable sources. That doesn't sound too demanding, as many countries already achieve well over 20%. In Sweden today, 40% already comes from renewables. The UK's problem is that we are starting too far back. The truth is that we have to work far harder than any other country in the EU, just to get to a figure of 15% by 2020. We're so far back that to get to 15% renewables by then will require an improvement of more than 1,000% since 2005. Getting to that figure will require a well thought out strategy that utilises a raft of different technologies and approaches. The pie chart here shows how we will go about it. What makes our renewables target even more daunting is the size of the national energy load. Energy requirements are typically measured by how many million tonnes of oil would be needed. By 2020, the UK will use the equivalent of 150 million tonnes of oil, known as MTOs. 15% of that has to come from renewables. Last year, the UK's energy output from renewables was less than 4.5 MTOs. By 2020, we have to raise that figure to 22.5 MTOs. That's an increase of more than 500% in 13 years. The big question is, how are we going to do it? The bigger answer is we're going to tackle it in a big way. This year, we are going to see the implementation of a new cohesive renewable energy strategy for the UK, something that the country has never had. It will concentrate on 5 key areas: energy efficiency, the grid, the built environment, heat, and transport. It's the first 4 of these topics we'll be covering here. Let's take a look at them individually. As anyone who's ever tried to balance a budget will know, one of the smartest things you can do is to start out by spending less. And it's the same with energy. By cutting the amount of energy we use, we can lessen carbon emissions, reduce the need for additional energy supplies, and cut costs. It will also allow us to reduce the amount of renewable energy that we would need to generate. Clearly, using less energy is far cheaper than investing in a new generation plant.